Well, if it isn't a great time to be an X-Men fan, isn't it? Especially with Deadpool and Wolverine making a buttload of money and overtaking Joker to becoming the highest grossing R-rated movie of all time. Thanks in large part to the return of Hugh Jackman.
They're gonna make him do this till he's 90.
Which is good because there were many times he almost didn't even make it here. Particularly because of how much the role tried to injure him over the years. And that's what we're looking at on today's Fact Feed Fiction, from the cursed casting process to the creation of his menacing movie claws.
3.
And all the times they cause trouble on set.
I mean, it's been a long time since I've stabbed someone, you know?
Thank you to everyone new here, by the way. The last video was the first long form to clear 1,000 views for my small channel, so thanks for checking me out and sticking around. I'm Rick, and let's get this slicing. Wait, I had a thing, wait. I had a thing. I forgot I had a thing.
Logan!
Wolverine is a character who needs no introduction at this point, but it's still fun to look at how the character got to where he is. First introduced as an adversary to the Hulk in 1974's issues number 180 and 181, and then added to the X-Men roster in the famous 1975 Giant Size number 1, Wolverine was considered something of a side character until his potential as a heavy hitter was unlocked during his battle with the Hellfire Club in 1980's Uncanny X-Men 133, which is widely considered to be the turning point where the character became a fan favorite. And for the longest time after that, there were only a few on-screen portrayals of the character. 1989's Pride of the X-Men gave us the hilariously Australian accented version played by Patrick Penny.
Welcome her. Wait, she's not joining the X-Men, is she?
Who is your dialect coach? The Minions?
And then there was of course Fox's X-Men the Animated Series Wolverine, voiced by Cal Dodd, that became the definitive interpretation through the 90s.
Hey, Tin Woodsman! I'm sending you back to Oz in pieces.
Now, when it came to bringing Wolverine into live action, there was a twisty road to follow. Some form of an X-Men movie was in works as early as 1984 for Orion Pictures. Financial troubles would lead to Catherine Bigelow, former wife of James Cameron, picking up the rights and drafting a script with Bob Hoskins, yes, Mario,
Last name? Mario.
in mind to play Wolverine. After those plans fizzled, the rights bounced around until the success of the cartoon actually reignited interest, and the rights went from Columbia to 20th Century Fox. In 1994 is where the shaping of what would become 2000's X-Men movie started to come into focus. The script went through many rewrites and restarts. Different X-Men came and went, but a general focus around Wolverine joining the team and befriending Jubilee or Kitty Pryde remained relatively consistent. Writers and directors came and went as well, famously Joss Whedon at one point.
You know what happens to a toad when it's struck by lightning? The same thing that happens to everything else.
Then Brett Ratner as a dark portent of the future.
And his appointment was met with some hostility on internet fan sites.
Until finally landing at the feet of Bryan Singer. Hey, that's weird. I wonder if those three have anything in common. The Jubilee Kitty role was swapped for a young Rogue. Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen were perfectly cast, but then they needed to find the perfect Wolverine. Sorry, Bob. Hey, where was his cameo in Deadpool?
It's not you, we're just going in a different direction.
I should play King Rhea.
Now, before we get into all the ways Hugh Jackman would eventually be hurt playing Wolverine, would you believe one of the only reasons he got the role was because of an injury? When Singer came on, he actually approached Russell Crowe to play the role. However, he turned it down, but Crowe did suggest friend and Australian actor Hugh Jackman. The studio, however, was really into Dougray Scott, believing he had the, quote, charisma, physicality, and intensity. The problem was that Scott was still filming Mission Impossible 2 with Tom Cruise, which was going way over time.
You gotta be kidding.
The MI2 production became something of a nightmare, reportedly in part because of Tom Cruise's star power rocketing upwards at this time, and him subsequently flexing that power on set.
Now we had a real knife that was really sharp and really pointy,
pulling for a lot more dangerous stunts.
We put a cable on this thing, we stick it to a
a frame that's not going to move. But anybody else want to lay there with their eye open and let the thing stop a ½ inch or a ¼ inch from their eye?
Like this one, where a real knife nearly stabs him in the eye.
And come into my eyes, it's more scary. I said, that's what I want, but I didn't want you to get hurt. How about the little close of the eyes, not right at the center, you know, and make it a little more safe. But he was so stubborn.
The budget of MI2 ballooned past its $100 million.
That was just nerve-wracking.
The set lost its production manager, designer, and director of photography.
I was shaking,
as people thought they couldn't question Cruise, and delays kept piling up. Dougray Scott was signed and sealed for X-Men and just needed to be released from MI2 to deliver, but the only way that was going to work out was if there were no more delays in the filming. October 18th, 1999 was the date they needed Scott in the Wolverine suit, and according to the actor, Tom Cruise was not going to let him leave MI2 early. Cruise had handpicked Scott to play the villain and said, "You gotta stay and finish the film." But also, maybe Tom just liked kicking Scott in the face for real.
When you see play it slow motion, you'll see the sand flying off the guy's face, and that's because it's real.
Then it happened. Scott suffered an unfortunately timed shoulder injury that put the production behind by a few days, and that was all it took. There isn't much information as to the details of how the injury happened, but considering Cruise's ambitious stunts combined with the fact that they were over budget and rushed, it probably wasn't too difficult for such an injury to happen. Hey, I wonder if something like that will come up again. And so by October 11th, Hugh Jackman was in as the Canadian superhero. Wait, UK, New Zealand, UK, Australian? What, you never considered a Canadian? You filmed there! And by October 18th, Wolverine was finally in front of the camera right on time, thanks in large part to an injury, which is ironic considering how much the role of Wolverine would damage Hugh's body over the course of 10 movies and 24 years.
It worked out. It really worked out.
Now, I can't remember exactly what movie it was, but it must have been around the time I actually went to see MI2 in theaters that I got my first glimpse of Wolverine's claws on the big screen.
Hold on to something.
20th Century Fox released a teaser trailer for X-Men that was just a Matrix-inspired techno-romp with a lot of nonsensical shots from the movie, but boy did it slap. Wait, what was the 2000 equivalent for slap? People still say slap now, right? That's still a thing? I might be getting too old for this. You could see a few blurry shots of Jackman as Wolverine, including this early version of the Statue of Liberty stunt that they would redo with CGI for the actual movie. But at the end of the teaser, we got our first snikt.
We're not what you think.
And in a big theater with a booming bass track, people pumped their fists in the air and shouted at that shot. Now, I don't know if it was because I grew up an X-Men fan, second to, if anything, Star Wars, but seeing those claws on screen was like seeing evidence that Santa existed. I mean, they looked better than awesome, but how did they make them?
Hi, my name is Jimmy Claus, and I made these.
Meet James Gawley, also known as Jimmy Claus. Jimmy has worked in movie special effects since 1990 and has a long career in the biz. A machinist and materials expert, and also owner of the best afro I've ever seen on a white guy, he caught his first break working on the movie JFK, building an air-powered mechanism to simulate the fatal shot. In '99, he would be brought on for the first X-Men film, specifically tasked with building the claws that transformed Hugh into Wolverine. According to Jimmy in this Tech Life interview from 2006, the original introduction to Wolverine's claws as envisioned by Singer played out similar to what ended up in the final movie. Two bar patrons would confront Logan and start a fight. Only in the original version, one of them would have taken a metal tray and tried to hit Logan with it. Logan would have punched the tray with his hand, and then the claws would pop through. And this was to be a practical effect, so for that to happen, Jimmy needed to make actual claws that would shoot out and cut metal. Sounds safe, right? Jimmy was a real pro though, and after a lot of experimenting, he developed a set of aluminum claws built into a silicone prosthetic replica of Hugh Jackman's arm. The claws were attached to an air compressor set to 70 psi, fast enough to feel scary without it being too dangerous.
Okay, so it should be just a...
Something Singer would confirm after being startled by it the first time he saw it in action.
1, 2, 3.
And according to Jimmy, the air compressor claws never misfired. The tray bit ended up being changed, however, to the even more dangerous sequence we got in the movie, where the blades pinched the bar patron's throat. But again, Jimmy and everyone on set were professionals who knew what they were doing. He made another silicone arm with blades that could be moved individually by hand. Should have sprung for an actual toy.
Maybe that's when Anna should save his life.
As Jimmy recounts the stunt on set, it was Kevin Rushton, a local stunt guy, pinned against the wall with 2 blades, one on either side of his neck. Then the middle one appears. It comes up slowly and touches his Adam's apple. We shot in reverse, nice and safe. See, Tom? That's how you do that stunt safely. Jeez. Because in reality, the 2 blades on the outside are actually squeezing his neck. They're so tight.
Claws go. God, how thick is Stu's neck?
So we started with them squeezing his neck and then pulled them away. And of course, when you see the middle blade move up to his neck, it's just me pulling it back in reverse.
Quite a few of the cuts in this film, in this particular sequence, are practical claws intercut with the CG claws.
Combined with a few shots done in CGI, the effect still holds up incredibly to this day. Although it's funny, when watching that shot closely again while making the video, you can actually see Kevin Rushton swallowing in reverse, and then when you play it back the right way, it goes in the right direction. I just think it's a funny thing to catch. It's still an awesome shot. Jimmy would create at least 3 different fake Hugh Jackman arms for the first movie, but the real challenge would come next, creating wearable claws that would give the illusion of the blades coming out of his knuckles.
Beat her up.
Beat her up how?
Scratching her.
Scratch her?
Jeez, Hugh, watch out for the kid's face. Look at him flinch.
I got 3 claws here. These are from X-Men 1.
Now there's a little confusion regarding the handheld claws that Hugh wore. In interviews and articles, Hugh Jackman claims that the claws he used on set for stunts were metal.
The very first film where you had real metal claws.
So in the beginning, they were, I don't know what we were thinking, they were actually metal.
Now the claws in the prosthetic arms were aluminum, but most of what Hugh wore on his hands during filming were not. Keyword most.
PVC was used for most of the blades on all 3 movies.
Most of the wearable claws, according to Jimmy, were plastic.
PVC, polyvinyl chloride.
To make the wearable claws, Jimmy, quote, made a mold. I had my metal prototype digitally analyzed. The mold was then filled with pressurized PVC plastic and the individual blades were created.
There was aluminum blades in X1, very few, 2.5 sets actually.
Aluminum blades, nicknamed the cuff set as you can see here, were used for the scene when Wolverine stabs the metal detector.
Then there was polycarbonate ones. Now, polycarbonate claws were made for the sole purpose of being able to make one special set of claws that I call the splay set.
The splay set was used for the scene where Magneto lifts Wolverine up in the train and his claws bend and splay outwards. But Jimmy says this was the only time this was used.
I wanted to clear the record on that. Polycarbonate was never used again on X-Men 2 or X-Men 3.
And there were a few sets made out of PPS, polyphenylene sulfide, but apparently they were actually too dangerous to use safely, so they weren't.
I made a small quantity of them, and I never took them out of the box. Never painted them, never used them. They were just too dangerous.
So it does sound like Jimmy and the rest of the crew understood the danger these props would present. But even so, the plastic claws were still sharp enough to penetrate skin. In fact, you can see in some of the pictures how padding had to be added around the blades to keep them from cutting your hand. something Hugh showed off to Ryan Reynolds in an Instagram post once. And you'll see how else they could be dangerous coming up. Time for a quick intermission question. Jimmy Claus didn't make the wearable Wolverine claws for just Hugh Jackman. Stuntmen, choreographers, photo doubles, they all needed access to sets of blades at different points during the shooting of the first X-Men movie. But the blades actually had to be sized for different hands in order to fit correctly, so there wasn't a gap between the blades and the knuckles. And Jimmy carried around a set of tools to help size each new set of blades for the hands that needed to wield them. So between that and general breakage, how many individual blades do you think Jimmy had to create for the first movie? 70, 170, or 700? Stay to the end of the video for the answer.
I'm the best there is at what I do. But what I do best isn't very nice.
Have you ever pretended to be Wolverine and either shoved some pencils in your knuckles or even dumber kitchen knives? I can't think of any X-Men fan not doing this at some point, and I'd be willing to bet real money you either hurt yourself or broke something too. Now, the FX crew on X-Men made a whole lot of different types of claws for different scenes.
I have a whole set of blades. There's probably about 15 different sets of different configurations that he wears. Some he wears in gloves, some that he wears on his bare hands. Some of them are real, some of them are plastic, some of them are bendy, some of them are chopped off for punching through walls and stuff like that.
And for complicated stunts, again, I'm sure they knew to be as safe as possible. But it does sound like it took an accident for them to learn that.
The girl who played Mystique, Rebecca Romaine, her double and I were doing a fight sequence, and there's a bit with her hand.
That's right inside the Statue of Liberty. Oh no, that's the number 2.
Yes, down the bottom of the Statue of Liberty in 1. And I went to stab her in the arm, which is part of the choreography, and she's meant to move her arm away, she forgot, and the thing went right into her arm, I mean like an inch. Of course, I was stunned. I mean, it's been a long time since I've stabbed someone, you know. And about a minute later, it was like a geyser.
Oh, did you faint?
I didn't faint, and I thought she was going to freak out, and the girl goes, "Yes, I've been stabbed by Wolverine." Typical stunt woman.
Hugh says this stunt was shot early with handheld metal claws before being switched to PVC.
The first one, of course, was all new. They were real metal. They were razor sharp. And they started to make them like PVC so that I wouldn't literally kill anyone.
Some of Jimmy's recollections conflict with this timing, though.
This predates everything that's out there.
In one of his old YouTube videos, he says the first scene he had to rush to make handheld claws for was the Sabretooth fight in the snow.
And this was the set that he wore very early in the shooting because that's all we had.
And again, he maintains that there were very few sets of real metal claws. Either way, it appears that as filming went on, Jimmy began making the PVC claws in a softer durometer.
There's 3 different types of PVC, 3 different hardnesses: firm, semi, and soft. Now these are soft. They'll bend, so they won't hurt you if you stab somebody with them. We made a bunch of these for different shots where there was going to be contact.
Just to reiterate, I can't confirm 100% that the claws in the stunt were actually metal, like what Hugh says, or just the hard PVC. Hugh might not even know for sure, and maybe even got confused because the handle and wiring in all sets were steel. I'm also willing to bet that some of this story has been a little exaggerated over the years, like the amount of gushing blood, for the sake of more entertaining interviews.
She grabbed and she ripped it out. There's blood pouring out.
Like finding oil. Blue. There was just blue and red just pouring down her arm.
But Jimmy Claus never mentioned this first accident that I could find, and the stunt woman never spoke about it, so we'll take Hugh's word for it that it was a serious cut. But there was also another injury with the same stunt woman, only instead of getting stabbed, she actually got knocked out. Now, the complete story behind this injury was a little hard to track down. Unlike the stabbing one, Hugh hasn't talked about it on camera, which is weird because a lot of articles floating around online frame this incident as some life-altering event for Jackman. They all use very similar wording, if not just copying and pasting the same text, but they all tell the story as Hugh feeling uncomfortable with the stunt, but that he didn't feel like he had the voice to really push back on it. And when it went south and he punched the stunt double, thus knocking her out briefly, He got angry and, quote, hated himself, and then learned that film is important. The people making the film are more important. And so he vowed never to let it happen again.
Spoiler! It happens again!
The source of these quotes come from a Success article in 2013, and they're actually a little out of context. The full story can be found in a 2017 Best Life article. Basically what happened was there was this scene where Mystique hits Wolverine with a chain link fence, and he uses his claws to cut it in half. It's in the final movie. The fence was a breakaway prop, made to be cut easily by the claws, but with a rubber bar holding it together at the end. And the sequence was set up by some choreographers from Hong Kong. It was apparently pretty late into the filming day when this stunt was going to be done. As Hugh tells the story here, I'd already been saying, guys, we're overtired. I want to practice. They're like, we only have one fence, it'll be fine. I'm like, what about that last bar? How do I cut through it? And they're like, it'll be fine. I had no clout whatsoever, so no one was listening to me. But I instinctively knew something was off. When they called action, Rebecca Romijn's stunt double charged Jackman with the fence. As she comes at me, she falls forward, and as I cut through the fence, I just missed hitting her eyes. I tilted up my hand and the heel of my palm went straight into her chin and knocked her out. Then, I was half mad with myself and half mad at those guys, and I lost it, just lost it. I'm yelling and screaming, this is amateur hour, and I walked off. Hugh Jackman's father had always taught him to control his emotions and that outbursts were indulgent and selfish. So when Jackman says he got mad at himself, it was because of that outburst, a classic Hollywood tantrum, he says. And when he says he learned that the people making film are important, he's actually referencing the fact that he yelled at everyone and stormed off. Not necessarily that this was a life-changing event after realizing he hurt someone. He still felt obviously bad about that part and promised himself to speak up again in the future, but I just want to make sure that the full context of the story is presented, because it's definitely one that has gone through a bit of an online telephone game where it's been morphed a little bit from being copied and copied again from article to article. It's not the only story this has happened to, as you'll see later, but it is also a good example of where on-set safety was compromised, not because the prop claws were dangerous, but because of budget, one fence, rush productions, late day, tired actors, and a lack of clout from someone voicing concerns. As you're about to see, it's more for those reasons that injuries kept piling up on the X-Men sets.
That actually requires some coordination. I don't have much hand-eye coordination.
Okay, are you gonna see that?
That stunt woman's name was Vicky Phillips, by the way, and she did the action scenes for Mystique for the first two movies. I actually looked for a way to contact her to corroborate some of these stories, but it doesn't appear she's actually worked in film for a while, and I came up empty. The only interview I could find with her doesn't mention any injuries, but it does say that because of how long it took the Mystique makeup to apply, she was already into overtime by the time she finally got to filming, accounting for that late shoot day we saw in the fence incident. And so far, she's been the only one actually stabbed by the claws, but there were some non-claw related injuries Hugh Jackman suffered in the first movie. Jackman didn't use a stunt double while facing off against Kevin Rushton in the movie's cage fight scene. Rushton describes both men getting pretty beat up and sore, as Bryan Singer would call over the microphone for the two men to hit each other harder, refusing to let them hold back. Wow, I wonder if anything bad will later be revealed about that guy. Plus, this shot of them colliding caused both of their hands to balloon up after the shoot. And then there's another story where Hugh Jackman was suspended via a harness during the Statue of Liberty fight, and at one point the apparatus became entangled with his wedding tackle, as he calls it. He recounts screaming and howling on set, but nobody stopping to check on him because they thought he was just trying to get into character. And then in that scene where he goes flying through the windshield, there was an issue where he went off course in one take and accidentally swiped his ear on a stationary camera. So that's the first movie. Thankfully, minimal stabbings, but wait until you hear about what happened in the sequel.
We've managed to gather evidence of a mutant training facility in upstate New York.
This facility is a school.
Sure it is.
I love X2, X-Men United. It's still my favorite of the Fox X-Men movies, and I think it does hold up as the best of the bunch, even today.
Why aren't you writing?
Alright, I'll be back.
Thanks.
But boy, learning about what a monster Bryan Singer was on the set of this movie is really depressing.
This is for me. This is for Mini-Me.
But I guess that's par for the course watching most old things from Hollywood lately.
I wanted to show you a small glimpse of what we're doing up here. I hope you like it.
For our first injury in this movie, Hugh's wedding tackle was threatened again.
I remember we had to go down this hallway and I had to run. I was meant to be naked. Was it the Wolverine origin movie? No, there was X-Men 2. And I jokingly went in, I said, I want a closed set for this. It's a very intense scene where I first realised I have an adamantium skeleton, I've been experimenting, I'm naked, there's blood, and I'm like, ah! And as I run around the corner, the first AD had the entire crew of females, all the females on the crew, with like $5 notes going, woo! And of course, the first thing I did was like, oh! I did cut myself on the inner thigh. Oh! Because I saw like, oh! When you see the inner thigh, do you mean
actually the inner thigh, thankfully.
Wow.
Now this was a close-up shot where the claws had to look really good, so they were most likely a harder set that wouldn't bend. But whether they were plastic or one of the rare metal sets, I couldn't determine, and Jimmy never mentioned the scene either. Hugh, and like a lot of these stories, laughs off this incident when recounting it later, but it is kind of a scummy thing to do to a naked actor. Like, imagine doing that to a woman. And although Bryan Singer does not appear to have been involved in this incident, the next one is where things on set almost blew up into a mutiny. There is actually a 1-inch scar next to Hugh Jackman's left eye. The injury was from a scene that takes place late in X2 when a bunch of the X-Men are on the X-Jet. Here's how Hugh talks about this visible injury in a 2014 Yahoo Movies article. That was me just following through and not quite having control of my limbs. And that's it. But in 2021, The Hollywood Reporter ran a story about Bryan Singer and the troubles he caused on the X-Men shoots. Among the details of Singer's toxic behavior, which ranged from the benign, like him continuously bringing random people to set, to the downright criminal, like accusations of roles being promised for sexual favors, and even a lawsuit by X-Men 1's Pyro alleging assault by the director's friends, we finally got the full account of this injury. Singer and a few crew members had taken a narcotic on the shoot day of the X-Men jet scene. Singer apparently had a history of painkiller abuse, but this incident sounded a little extra. Producer Tom DeSanto tried to shut down the set for safety reasons when he found out, but Singer refused, going ahead with the scene even though the stunt coordinators were also not on set that day. The stunt that injured Jackman was supposed to be shot the following day, but for some reason, a high-as-balls Singer decided to move it up and shoot it without the proper support, and despite objections from cast and crew. Hey, some of that stuff came up again! And so, likely because of those reasons, Jackman missed his follow-through and cut his eye, bleeding on set. After that, Singer actually had the gall to try to send DeSanto away from the rest of the movie's filming. And that's when the majority of the cast led a mutiny, confronting Singer in his trailer and threatening to quit if DeSanto was forced to leave. This is where Halle Berry's often quoted out of context, "You can kiss my black ass" comes from as well. She was protesting because DeSanto was actually looking out for them. Unfortunately, the studio backed Singer, which is nuts, considering not just everything that would eventually come out about the director, but the actual events as they were happening in real time. But the first X-Men movie was a hit, and this movie was tracking to eclipse it, so the money won out. DeSanto left the set, the movie went forward, and the mutiny fizzled. Good job sticking up for safety again, Hugh? DeSanto has never publicly talked about it, and Singer's people deny it happened. Also, it's interesting, there's a lot of scenes towards the end of the movie where the characters are all on the X-Jet, but none of them involve a stunt with Wolverine and his claws. I'm guessing it was scrapped after the incident or just cut from the final movie. But anyway, Hugh Jackman has never confirmed any specific details, although he did say this to The Guardian in 2023. There are some stories, you know. I think there are some ways of being on set that would not happen now, and I think that things have changed for the better. There's way less tolerance for disrespectful, marginalizing, bullying, and oppressive behavior. There's zero tolerance for it now, and people will speak out, and I think that's great. I certainly hope so, because if there's one thing we've seen with some of these directors is when you hear one story about them being awful, you can pretty much bet that that's just the tip of the iceberg. The studio giving Singer a pass here helped bury these stories for 20 years, and most likely allowed for more awful behavior to take place and be swept under the rug, and that's unacceptable.
This is X3. This is all about emotion. Ready?
By the third movie, Jimmy was making softer sets of claws.
These were made for X-Men 3 for special gags.
It's time we make our choice.
X3 had a lot more fighting, so switching to rubber claws made everything safer.
These were made of silicone rubber, low durometer.
CGI was also being used more and more.
So the idea is that the computer can track these and then add the claws on. Because there's 3 of them, they can track them in 3D space. So that's what that's all about.
Jimmy actually made sets of tracking claws as early as X2.
Hugh Jackman wore these on several occasions. Because on one of the takes, he went right into the bag wearing real claws and broke them, so they figured he's dangerous.
But as you can see in some behind-the-scenes footage from X3, full CGI was often doing most of the heavy lifting.
After I made this by hand, it was then digitized with a machine. They waved it with this laser light and, you know, in 5 minutes, there it is in the computer in a 3D model, and it's perfect.
More computer effects seem to cut down on the number of injuries, as you'll see, but that also meant less work for people like Jimmy, an unfortunate trade-off when it comes to budgets and safety. Although, like we've seen, a lot of safety had less to do with the practical effects being dangerous.
Roll those back.
You know, that's the evolution of technology. When a shot is blown off to a computer graphic, that means that, you know, there's an hour or 2 or 4 out of a shooting day, so it buys them set time and less need for somebody like me that can actually make something by hand that stands the test of time.
There was something that was lost moving these effects all into the computer. In X-Men Origins Wolverine, in which Jimmy did not work on, the CGI claws became infamously bad.
You know, like anything, it can be overused. It just shouldn't do everything. And that's my biggest beef with where film business has gone of late. It's all about the bottom line, and unfortunately the whole essence of filmmaking to me, it's about the art and being part of expressing that. So thanks for your time.
Later in that movie, and for the next one, The Wolverine, the effects crews went back to the system that Jimmy had come up with. Different hardness for different shots.
The adamantium claws themselves were pretty much executed in the same way that they have been in the other films, because they've had 3 movies to perfect that, and they work quite well.
So there are metal claws, lightweight foam claws, and there are cut-off claws to key with CGI units. So there is a bigger variety of claws than there are swords and knives because of the different functions they have to perform.
Unfortunately, without Jimmy himself, which sucks. But that's why I really wanted to highlight the great work that Jimmy did, because he really set the standard for over 2 decades worth of effects on these movies. I actually got a hold of Jimmy to find out what he's been up to since the X-Men movies. He still gets occasional work on films, as you can see on his website, but he's also now filming his own series where he'll be teaching about electricity and electronics, followed by a Patreon where he will go into advanced animatronics. I'll make sure to update with links to his work in this video description when they come out.
It's an honor to meet the Wolverine.
Hugh Jackman says that he actually lost track of how many times he stabbed himself or others claim Wolverine.
I've stabbed my thighs, I had like scars, I still have scars on my thighs.
But there's no notable stories that have come out after X3 involving major incidents with the claws that he or anyone else has shared. There are, however, a few other Wolverine-related injuries that happened to Hugh. In 2013, while doing a stunt for the spectacular bullet train sequence in The Wolverine, his neck got caught in a harness while doing a swing from the train, nearly snapping it. Even though it didn't result in a lasting injury, the near miss was apparently so horrifying that Hugh went into shock and the crew sent him home.
It was one of those days I got sent home early with the old, we've got to check for concussion kind of look. Yeah.
This incident caused a rift with his then wife Deborah Lee Furness, who yelled at him for being reckless. According to Jackman, she said, "Is this a midlife crisis?"
Why don't you use your double? I said, I don't know, I thought I could do it. You can't do it, you're old, stop it.
And accused him of trying to be Tom Cruise. Hey, we've come back full circle quite nicely. Following that incident, Hugh remained relatively unscathed all the way up to 2024. Prior to the release of Deadpool and Wolverine, it was noticed that Hugh was walking around with a cast on his finger, and this was due to him bending it backwards during an ADR session of all things. For those of you who don't know, ADR is when an actor comes back to re-record lines or sounds in a studio, often to produce clean audio to be mixed into scenes if the sound on tape isn't great. And if you've ever seen Hugh actually do ADR for Wolverine action scenes, you'll understand how it must have been actually quite easy for him to hurt his finger. Also, Hugh Jackman has revealed that playing Wolverine has done some lasting damage to his body. He says that his voice is somewhat permanently damaged.
This one's got a little breathing problem.
And he has trouble singing falsetto now, thanks to all the Wolverine grunts and growls he had to muster up over the years. Maybe his wedding tackle could use a few extra squeezes in the harness if he wants to reach the outside. No, that's a weird line. I'm gonna cut that.
You're gonna give me the keys to your car and some money for gas, or are you gonna wake up in the hospital?
Plus, he often employs the bodybuilder technique of dehydrating himself for shirtless scenes to make his muscles and veins pop out more on camera. Something he acknowledges is dangerous and you shouldn't really be doing. And finally, unrelated to Wolverine, but there was that one time he crashed while ziplining during an Oprah segment. He came out with a black eye, but he still sang. With Hugh perhaps finally closing the book on Wolverine, although who really knows, I think this is the most accurate catalog of injuries Hugh and others suffered during his 24 years playing the character. And a big shout out to the stunt doubles like Vicky Phillips and Kevin Rushton too, who also went through a lot of hard work and pain for certainly less money and fame. But I did want to try and get as accurate an accounting as possible, because like with the X-Men Knockout story, a lot of details from these incidents have gotten warped and then repeated over the years. The internet is so full of disinformation these days. This Express article from 2009 makes up a story following the Mystique stabbing that, quote, subsequent efforts to prevent him from using real metal claws were not particularly successful and even involved him using a fake limb with one arm tucked behind his back. The prop was only used in one scene before it was discarded. This is not true. The fake arm they're talking about was actually the one used in the bar scene.
Very first time they come out, that scene where I'm holding the guy up against the bar, it is from a fake arm that was built for me. And in fact, I had to act the entire scene with one arm behind my back while 4 guys were holding a fake arm.
And that is real. We used it once, and it took about 5 hours to get that shot.
Not only did it work on camera, but it wasn't discarded. It was just used for that one shot, typical of movie effects. Moving forward in time, this Slash Film article from 22 repeats the bad info from Express and also makes up a story that it was after the bad CGI in Origins that the crew on Wolverine came up with using different sets of practical claws. But we saw those same FX people say they went back to using Jimmy's system.
Were pretty much executed in the same way that they have been in the other films, because they've had 3 movies to perfect that, and they work quite well.
Give credit where it's due, Slash Film.
What tradition did Hugh Jackman acquire after an accident on set?
Here's a video that claims after the Mystique stabbing, Jackman started a tradition of handing out lotto cards to the crew as penance.
Jackman was deeply affected by the incident and nearly went mad with guilt. In an effort to keep morale high on set after the accident, Jackman started a tradition of giving lottery tickets to everyone involved in the production.
But in this Ellen interview, he explains that it was just a nice way to introduce himself on set and do a good deed.
I just thought at least once a week, I should at least have a little conversation with every person on set, because I like the team thing. So I invented this thing of giving a lotto ticket. So every Friday I give a lotto ticket.
Wow.
Yeah.
That makes me look bad.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You can adopt it.
Sorry, guys.
You can adopt it.
No.
That's funny. I wonder if anything bad was ever revealed about how she treated her crew. And of course, we can't talk about misinformation without AI rearing its ugly head in full glory.
Hugh Jackman faced numerous real-life injuries during filming.
This dumb TikTok not only messes up which movie the thigh stabbing took place on, but hallucinates a water tank incident in a movie where Wolverine never goes underwater.
While filming The Wolverine, where he nearly drowned while performing a scene in a water tank.
And you can bet the internet is filled with this crap. I love AI! I think the real problem with all of these articles and videos getting stuff wrong is not so much the minutia of the details, but the thing that bothers me is how the real cause of a lot of on-set safety gets buried. Go back to Tom Cruise and the problems he created on MI2, causing an injury that led Doug Reese Scott to miss out on the role of a lifetime. Stunt coordinators not listening to a new actor that said he was tired, a prank on a nude actor, a toxic director on drugs, shooting a scene early without stunt coordinators. The history of Hugh Jackman's injuries turns out to be less that the claws were killing machines, and more so shortcuts on safety and directors with big egos getting away with bad behavior. Like, there's even this Looper article from 2020 that says Singer actually backed down during the X2 mutiny, which is false. I reached out to Jimmy for comment on some of these on-set incidents, and he did get back to me. I will not talk about events on set. What happens on set stays on set. Okay. I mean, that's fine from a below-the-line worker not wanting to bite the hand that feeds them. But I think it's important that those with clout step up to address safety issues, and having to go back and fact-check a lot of these stories, I'm not sure Hugh is quite living up to the promise he made.
Hey, it's just a hug. Sure.
It's a weird business, the film business, producer Lauren Donner said in response to the Hollywood Reporter article on Singer. We honor creativity and talent, and we forgive the brilliant ones. Unconsciously, we probably do enable them by turning a blind eye to whatever they're doing and taking their product and putting it out to the world. No, really? You know, Alec Baldwin just had his involuntary manslaughter case dropped in the tragic Rust shooting. But if you read up on what was going on behind the scenes, you see familiar things went wrong leading up to it. Yes, there was an inexperienced armorer, but that only happened because the producers, including Baldwin, did not want to spend the money or give the proper time for the safety to be worked out, leading to experienced people not taking the job or quitting. And other on-set complaints from people without clout fell on deaf ears to the people with more influence and money. And now they are getting off. And really, you can just see that some of the stuff that Hugh Jackman said was fixed on movie sets still needs a lot of work. At the end of the day, the injuries Hugh received seem pretty in line with someone doing this kind of physically demanding job for 24 years, even with a few extra scars on his body. And I think we have Jimmy Claus and the rest of the effects crew on the first few movies to thank for making sure things were safe. But until next time, let me know what you think. Have you heard of any more Wolverine-related injuries that I missed? And do you think the climate around on-set safety has gotten better, like Hugh Jackman says?
Obviously it's PG-13, so you can't have bits and pieces flying about, right?
Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe. And it's time to answer our intermission question. How many blades did Jimmy produce for use in the first X-Men movie? 700. Yeah, it was a lot. His count probably includes a lot of the prototypes too, but don't worry, for the second and third movies, he got that number down to only about 600 per movie. So he got more efficient. But still, that's like over 300 complete sets of claws he made. And by the way, I want to give a special shout out to Mike Spurgeon from Dark Matter Props. The interview with Jimmy Claus in Tech Life that I got a lot of this information from, the second half of that interview was actually lost even to the Internet Archive. But while prowling around on some movie prop forums, I saw that he mentioned he had saved it to his hard drive like 10 years ago. And when I reached out to ask him about it, he actually still had it. So thanks so much, Mike. Really, I'm going to link to his Etsy page. You should check it out. It looks like he does a lot of cool movie reproduction stuff. And after this video goes live, I'll find a way to upload the whole article again so everyone can have access to it. It's really a fun interview, and I'm glad it wasn't lost.